Welcome to the Peninsula Library District 4th Annual One Book, One Peninsula Author Presentation. We hope you enjoyed Maxim's music. I wanted to say that we won't be hearing any other cellists today. A last minute bad news regarding Nathaniel and Kimberly will be here today. We all understand, I think. I'm Sylvia Richardson, manager of the Adult Services Department here at the College Library. Before we introduce our guests, we have some important announcements and thank yous to make. My first thank you has to be to everybody who braved this temperature and came out today. Thank you. Our librarian, who is mostly responsible for our program, has a little announcement.
Hi there, everyone. I'm really glad to see you here today. I just wanted to take a moment to announce our local author fair, which is to happen on October 6th. It's a Saturday. I believe it's 2 Saturdays from today. And we have 40 authors who are coming to speak, to read, to share their work, and it would be great if you could come and support them. This is on October 6th at 2 p.m., and we have flyers over at the water table. So please come. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. We also want to thank Friends of the Library. They sponsor this and every single program we offer at our library. And we encourage you all to actively support the vital work of this group by joining and contributing generously. Just outside the tent is a table with more information. We also want to thank Caranea Resort for providing accommodations to Mr. Wilkins and his family. Everybody gives me grief about our show there. And we want to thank Amuse Music. They provide us with several instruments that we use to help promote the program and displays. There is a table outside with representatives from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I hope you'll stop by and meet Paul Stansbury from the South Bay chapter and help yourself with information about their important work. They do a lot of good things. Our local bookseller from Peninsula Promenade, Book Frog, will have Steve's book available for sale there, although I understand they almost went out. Thank you very much, everybody. Happy about it. You will not regret reading this book. It will change your life. Calvary's Library began the One Book, One Peninsula programs 4 years ago as an opportunity to bring our communities together through a shared reading experience and encourage thoughtful discourse and engagement. I can't think of a more perfect book in which to do that than a soloist. Today we are so honored to be able to host the soloist author Steve Lopez, a writer whose ability to share his unflinching gaze helps us all see more deeply and connect more fully the human condition. Now I'd like to introduce a good friend of Steve's, someone whose name you'll recognize from the pages of the soloist. The indomitable Stella March has been working for many decades fighting the stigma and ignorance surrounding mental illness. At 97 years of age, she still carries that fight on. Stella has been awarded NAMI's Distinguished Service Award. She is a trusted advisor to LA County's Department of Mental Health, and she's the recipient of the Volunteer of the Year Award. People like her are responsible for getting places like LAMP set up in downtown LA, the Village in Long Beach. Step up on 2nd and Seminole. So please join me in welcoming Stella, stigma buster extraordinaire.
by Sylvia again. And I'm so happy to see so many of you here to recognize all that Steve Lopez has done for us. I remember years ago when I first met Steve, he was very interested in everything, to know everything about mental illness, which he used to write his wonderful book, The Soloist. And today, the soloist is living down in an apartment. He is playing his instruments and he's living a fairly good life, thanks to Steve. Nathaniel Ayers is his name, and he would have been here today, but the one who transports him had a sick puppy. She was torn between her puppy and her Nathaniel. Anyway, he is with us in spirit, and I want to see you to know that. Steve himself has been a columnist for several newspapers and Time magazine, and has spent a great deal of his time with people, talking to them and finding out what is hurting and writing his columns about it. He has continued this through his current problems. And it was a great thing for him to come here today to talk to us about all of his doings with the people, just like you and me, who have our problems with our family. 1 in 4 has a mental illness. 1 family in 4 have a mental person. So it really is an outreach, and how wonderful Steve Lopez has done so much to bring it to the attention of all of his readers who read every word of it and answer and send lots of emails and letters responding to his columns. It is my great pleasure today to introduce again our wonderful Steve Lopez, author of many books, including the wonderful soloist, Steve Lopez.
Hello, folks. It is a beautiful day, sunny, it's warm. Look out there, I see blue sky. Why are you folks not at the beach? We should have done this at the beach. Next time. Next time we're going to the beach. Some of you, well, let me first of all say, what an honor it is to be introduced by Stella March, who has been one of my great teachers on this journey I've been on for 7.5 years. I got into this meeting a guy who had some issues, and I knew not the first thing about what to do. And I started to turn to people who could help. And from the beginning, she's been a friend, an educator, and supported me in many ways on this. And some of you may not know, there probably are I can't think of anybody in the history of California who has done more to advance the cause of awareness about mental illness and to demand that we understand our failures and to begin to address them and to offer the support and services to those with mental health issues. When Stella first dealt with a family member who had mental health issues, she knocked on doors, she knocked down doors, she demanded attention and change, and it's an honor to be with somebody who will forever be known as one of the 2 or 3 people in California who have done the most for people with mental illness and for all of their families. Let's hear it for Stella. I want to thank the Friends of the Library, especially Loretta, who picked me up and was carrying an ice bag in her car. I want to thank the library for whoever had the wisdom to select this book. I still don't know who that was. Was it a committee? Was it one person? Was it a close vote? Did I just barely make it? You know, the book has been out for 5 years, so I guess I should be pleased that this has happened today, but does this mean I lost 4 years in a row? What were the other books that you folks picked? So I want to thank all of the members of the community who have shown up here today and who are supporting not just this book, but this great institution. As I was telling some folks earlier today, I love it when I get a lot of calls from people, can you come and speak to our group, can you do this or that? When it's a library group, I always say yes. And it's partly because I consider there to be very few American institutions more valuable than our public libraries. And as you know, they're under siege in many cases. They're threatened. Their very existence is threatened. And I believe it's important to support something that is something of an equalizer. I mean, it doesn't matter what your job is or what your interests are. You can get some help and some direction and great education at a library. And people like to, these days, some of them say, well, who needs a library any longer with Google? I take particular offense when I hear that because my son is a librarian. And I need him to be employed. I went to see my son, and he was teaching a class on how to use the library. And I was so impressed and so proud of him. This was just last year. He works at a college library in New Orleans. And students came in, and he asked them questions about if this were the subject you were researching. Where would you go first, and how would you find out how to do this and that? And a lot of them just didn't have the answers. And without that expert guidance that you can get from a librarian, you might be lost, or you might get information that you can't really trust. And a librarian is trained to get you to the best information. Are there any librarians in here today? Raise your hand. Thank you. Another reason I like to do library events is because I got married in a library. I'm not expecting that to happen today. I got married in the Free Library of Philadelphia. I was living there at the time, and it was a beautiful building, and I liked the idea of being surrounded by thoughts, ideas, books, all of that energy, and my wife and I were married in the lobby of the library. So here I am. Thank you for coming, and some of you may be wondering what I'm doing up here with a cane and several ice packs. I think I'm now up to 8 or 9 ice packs that have been up to the stage. If you don't know why I'm up here with a cane, all I can say is shame on you, you must not be reading the LA Times. Before leaving today, you'll all be asked to show your records, your receipts, that you are all subscribers. And you won't be let out of the tent. Unless you are, no matter how hot it gets. Just as a library is an important institution in a democracy, so too is a thriving newspaper. You need a watchdog. You need somebody with a big enough staff to do the long, hard work of investigative reporting. And it's becoming harder and harder to do that these days because of the nature of changes primarily in how information is disseminated and how advertising has changed. People often think that these are just editorial decisions. Let's make it a smaller newspaper and cut the staff in half. That'll work. It's all driven by advertising, and advertisers now have thousands of places to go rather than just 2 or 3. So it's a good thing for them, but not so good necessarily for the newspaper industry or for the democracy, if you ask me. So support your local newspaper, whatever it might be, and particularly so if it's the LA Times. So if you have been reading the paper, then you know that exactly 1 month ago I went into the hospital for a simple knee replacement, the first of 2 that I have to get done. Simple knee replacement. There's a doctor here I met earlier today who said there's no such thing as a simple knee replacement. I have discovered that that is true. I remember coming out of the operating room talking to a nurse, and then he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm feeling kind of groggy." And then I was out, and for 30 seconds, I was gone. Full cardiac arrest. Now, if that happens again here today, feel free to rush this page and begin chest compression. That's how a nurse by the name of Andrew Fabella saved me at Keck USC Hospital. And he came to my room every night to just check up on me and talk about it. And you could have read all about this in Los Angeles. Okay, we're here to talk about something different than my medical issues. I'm coming along a little bit. I might have to sit down here in a bit. They said to keep the knee iced and elevated. I think I'm going to begin by taking my jacket off. I'm going to stand up, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to wander around, and if I squeal in pain, that's the end of the show. 7.5 years ago, it was success. I was in downtown Los Angeles looking for a column because that's what I do. And I was wandering around, and I remember college journalism professors saying, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. That day it was the ears that worked for me. I heard beautiful music, I turned and I saw this amazing picture. A man playing a violin near Pershing Square in downtown LA. You know what? Some of you may already know this. How many people here have read the book? How many people have seen the movie? How many people have noticed differences between the book and the movie? Give me a key difference between the book and the movie.
You're divorced.
I'm divorced, correct. I'm married in the book, and in the movie they divorced me. People ask how that worked out. And you notice that my wife is not here with me today. She's at the hotel. I took her to see the premiere. And she looks up there and sees that we're divorced. And I said, well, what do you think? And she said, maybe it's not such a bad idea. I told the producer, and he's a good friend of mine, Gary Foster, that as long as the movie was true to my relationship with Nathaniel, they could do whatever they wanted. And I think that it is true. And you know what? Moments before I was called up, I checked my email, I'll edit it, to see if my wife needed to get hold of me for anything. And there are 2 emails that have arrived within the last 10 minutes, both of them from South Africa, from people saying that they just saw the movie The Soloist, and they were inspired by it, and they learned a lot by it. They want to know how I'm doing and how Nathaniel's doing. And I think that's because the movie got the relationship right. I think it's been a public service, and one of the joys of my life after the movie is to get emails like that almost every day from somebody in some corner of the world who has read the book or seen the movie. And from the very beginning, I wondered about whether I should even be writing about this guy, invading his privacy and exposing him like that. And it's never been an easy decision. But I've always felt that we've gone too long in this country not telling stories about people like Nathaniel. And that we're a big part of the reason for the stigma. We're a big part of the reason for the existence of Skid Row. Just shove people away, off into that human corral, out of sight, out of mind. And we need to start telling the whole story of who these people are. I remember one time I wrote something about my friend, a mentally ill musician, and I got an email or a phone call from Stella saying, Steve, please, this is important. He's not a mentally ill musician. He's a musician. He's a man. He's a son. He's a brother. He's a friend. He's a beautiful person who is dealing with a mental illness. Please present the full picture. And it was such a great blessing. Such a great blessing. So here's this guy playing a violin, and I look a little closer and realize it's missing 2 strings. I think, well, that's pretty amazing. How does he get that kind of music out of a violin missing 2 strings? And then I can see there's some issues. I wonder if he even knows that there's supposed to be 4 strings. And I move it a little bit closer, and I see that he's got all of his belongings in a shopping cart, and there's a little sign that he's put on the side of the shopping cart, and he wrote on that, Little Walt Disney Concert Hall. The big Walt Disney Concert Hall was just up the hill, and I thought, this is pretty cool. This guy's got his own stage right here, and he's living in his own world of music. And I noticed one more thing. Often with a street musician, there's a hat out, the violin case might be open, or the guitar case, playing for money. Not this guy. You're just playing for love. And when I stopped and introduced myself, he said, I'm just trying to get back on track. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I used to play, and I'm just trying to get better at this. And he was also quite wary of me, and even startled when I first approached. And I realized there were some issues, and this might take a while. When he calmed down enough, I asked him why he played in that particular spot, and he pointed across the street, and he said, there's the Beethoven statue. I don't know who put it there, but what a great city this must be, that somebody put a Beethoven statue right there, and I play here every day for inspiration. And I thought, okay, he's really got problems, because there's no Beethoven statue. I spent a lot of time in downtown LA. I've never noticed a Beethoven statue. I turned and I looked. Folks, there's a Beethoven statue in Pershing Square. And the reason is that the concert hall used to be there, and when they left, Beethoven stayed behind. So here's Nathaniel Anthony Ayers out of Cleveland, Ohio, who is playing there with a 2-string violin. And I said, you know, violin's got 4 strings, and he said, my whole goal in life is to figure out how to get the other 2. And I said, how about if I buy them for you? He said, I couldn't do that, I can't take money without working for it. And I said, well, I'm listening to your music, and I'll pay you for that. He said, but I don't play well enough, and so I can't take it. And I said, well, then how are you going to get those other 2 strings? And he said, I have no idea. This was the beginning of our relationship. I couldn't get enough out of him to do a column that day, and I could never have dreamed on that day that I'd write 10 or 20 or 30 columns, whatever the number is today, that we'd become friends, that 7.5 years later, I could say we're still in touch on a regular basis. I see him every week. He calls most days. I never could have guessed there'd be a book. I never could have guessed there'd be a movie. And I certainly could never have guessed that a man living in Skid Row, sleeping on the pavement, would become such an inspiration to me and such a teacher. And it's one of the things I love most about my job and about Mr. Ayers. When I went back to find out a little bit more about him, he wasn't there, and I got a little nervous, and I checked Skid Row because he told me that was where he slept. And it was the first time I really saw Skid Row. I mean, I'd driven through, but now I'm looking for somebody I know. And I was stunned, just stunned by what I saw. And maybe because now suddenly, rather than just dismissing everybody there, I was thinking there must be a lot of Nathaniels there. Not necessarily musicians, but real people with real stories. Somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's son or daughter. And I felt a more personal connection. And when I couldn't find him, I got worried, and then one day driving to work, there he is, a new location, 2nd Street Tunnel. And I stopped the car, he remembers me, and over the coming weeks, he got a little more comfortable, and he told me a little bit more each time, and one day, there he was, scratching names on the sidewalk, and I said, who are they? And he says, well, Mr. Lopez, those were my classmates at Juilliard. Excuse me, Mr. Ayers? What do you mean, Juilliard? Yeah, Juilliard School for the Performing Arts. New York City? Yes. You were a student there? Yes. I was there, for a long time. And in the end, well, what happened? Who knows your story? He didn't want to tell much of it. And he said, why don't you call Harry Barnum? Well, who's he? He said, well, he's with the Cleveland Orchestra. And I said, well, do you talk to this guy regularly? He said, I haven't talked to him in a decade. I said, well, how do we even know he's still alive? He said, I don't know, why don't you dial 216? And he went like this and wrote out the number in the air. And I said, so you are still in touch with him? He said, no, I can't remember the last time I spoke. I go back to the LA Times, a block away, dial the number, and it's the Barnoff residence. Pretty soon I'm speaking to Harry Barnum, a bass player in the Cleveland Orchestra. And I say, I'm out here on the streets of downtown Los Angeles. There's a guy playing a 2-string violin who says he knows you. Does the name Nathaniel Anthony Ayers ring a bell? There's silence, then there's weeping. And Mr. Barnoff says, that was one of the greatest kids I've ever known. That guy had such an amazing talent. He worked so hard. And I'm glad to hear he's alive, and I hope we'll give him my best. And I said, well, what happened? He said, Nathaniel came to me when he was maybe 12 or so, and he had worn out. His junior high teacher had nothing left to teach him. Every instrument that he handed Nathaniel. Nathaniel was, relatively proficient at it in just a few weeks. And he liked in particular the big double bass. And so the teacher knew, Mr. Barnum, knew that he taught at the Cleveland Music School Settlement, where the motto is, all the children of Cleveland ought to have access to the arts, regardless of ability to pay. So that's where Nathaniel Anthony Ayers got his beginning, with Harry Barnum. And he liked it so much that he told Mr. Barnum he wanted to make a career of it. Mr. Barnum said, well, that's great to hear, Nathaniel, but you've gotten kind of a late start, and this is really a competitive field, and if you want to be a musician, you've got to dedicate your life to it right now. This is hours and hours every day, and if you really do work at it, maybe you can get a scholarship and go on to college that way. You could ride this bass all the way into a university. And he says, well, okay, that sounds good. What college did you go to, Mr. Barnum? And Harry says, I went to the Juilliard School for the Performing Arts. And Nathaniel said, well, that's great, I'll go there too then. Mr. Barnum said, you know what, that's great to have, high standards for yourself and that kind of ambition, but let's keep things real here. And Ohio University has a great program. You really work. I know some people there. Let's see if we can get you into that school. And Nathaniel worked his tail off for the next several years and got a scholarship, a music scholarship, full ride to Ohio University. And he called Mr. Barnum and told him that things were going well, but he wasn't sure he wanted to stay there. And Mr. Barnum would say, just stick it out, Nathaniel. You're in a great spot. You're on your way. Just keep at it. Well, one day, Nathaniel arranges for himself a trip to New York City. He flies student standby out of Cleveland to JFK. Does anybody here remember student standby? For you young folks, imagine this. You don't have a reservation, you don't have a ticket, but you go to the airport anyway. And you just stand there, and if they've got an extra seat, you get on the plane at a discount. This is the way it used to be. Now my idea is, especially now that I've got a cane that I can shake at somebody, is senior standby. You go to the airport with your bags packed. Wherever there's an empty seat, wherever the plane's going, what else have you got to do? If the discount's big enough, I'll go anyway. So Mr. Ayers goes to JFK, takes a cab to the area around the Lincoln Center, walks into Juilliard, and auditions before 3 members of the New York Philharmonic who were on the faculty at Juilliard and he nailed it. Nathaniel Anthony Ayers, about 18 years old, nailed this audition that he set up for himself, and he said, go back to Ohio University, finish this year, this summer, catch a plane to Aspen, Colorado. The Aspen Music Festival is summer school for Juilliard. You'll meet your classmates, you'll meet your professors, and when the summer is over, we'll see you back here at Juilliard. Young man, congratulations, you'll be on a full scholarship. Amazing, isn't it? He found his love, he worked at it, and he got a chance. So he goes to Juilliard. The first year is great, the second year is great, and the third year things begin to unravel. And in the case of schizophrenia, that's often when it happens. Late adolescence, late teens, early 20s. Something happens. There's a natural pruning process in the brain. Sometimes it goes a little bit out of whack. Sometimes, you know, with early intervention and management and maybe some meds, this can be dealt with. Sometimes it's a little bit too late to do much at all. Nathaniel was seeing and hearing things that nobody else was. It was just horrifying and frightening for him. And he didn't know what to do, and so he kind of lashed out, and you know, friends were a little bit nervous about him, and I met a professor who was a little bit scared of him. And you know, it's easy when you see somebody doing that to hold them, to judge them. It's like, you know, what kind of, you know, why can't this person control himself or herself? And we're very good at standing in judgment, but not so good at understanding. And people thought all the wrong things. I remember speaking to a professor who went to the administration and said, this guy's having, I think, a breakdown. He's having some mental issues. And they said, this kid's just got an attitude. This is Juilliard. This is not a hospital. It's sink or swim. He can play or he can't. He's going to have to pull himself together. And at that time, this professor was noticing some changes on the streets of New York. He was seeing people sleeping in subway stations. He was seeing people on the pavement, even when it was too cold for anybody to be there. And he was seeing more and more of them. And it was a time, of course, when we were emptying hospitals. We were emptying mental institutions. And there might have been some good reasons to shut down some mental hospitals. There were some abuses. People were neglected. People were maybe overdrugged in some cases. The idea, though, was to close the hospitals and build community clinics so that people could be managed, that we could take the pressure off of loved ones who aren't trained or equipped to deal with serious mental illnesses, and that this would be the humane thing to do, and maybe even less expensive than running all of these huge hospitals. So, we did the first part, shut the hospital. We didn't do the second part. So, we put those people in the stairwells of the subway stations. We put people down on Skid Row, fending for themselves. Not everybody there has a mental illness, but when you begin to wander the streets and see people by the thousands, it's clear that many people are dealing with health issues, with mental health issues. The number of veterans down there is shocking, and you feel ashamed. I just felt ashamed when I would see so many people suffering that we do next to nothing for. So, Mr. Ayers is struggling and just can't handle it anymore. One night, ends up in handcuffs in a police car on the way to Bellevue. The diagnosis is paranoid schizophrenia. And so began many years of handcuffs, jails, straitjackets, shock therapy, Thorazine. And he'd be better for a while, he'd be home for a while back in Cleveland, and then back out on the streets, and nothing seemed to work for long term. His mother did her best, his mother Flo. And when his mother died, Nathaniel hopped on a bus, a Greyhound bus, and came to California because his father, who'd been out of the picture for a while, was living in England, or at least he thought so. Nathaniel got to LA, found out his father had left. He wandered the streets. He was afraid. He was alone until he bumped into that guy who saved his life, Beethoven. Beethoven. And he thought, well, this is a pretty cool city. If Beethoven is here, and maybe this is where I'll get my start. So I wrote that first column about this guy and his story and why he was playing with two strings and that he'd been to Juilliard. And This is where we know that newspapers can still perform a great public service. I didn't anticipate the reaction that the column would get. You know, I thought a lot of people just dismiss Skid Row and those who are out on the street spending for themselves, and like I say, we'd love to make judgments about them. People might just dismiss this column. In the time it took me to read one email, 10 more would arrive. My phone started ringing, letters started arriving. People wanted to know more about Nathaniel Anthony Ayers. They were rooting for him. They were rooting for me to find ways to help him. And then a couple days later, boxes started arriving, and I would open them and find violins with 6 strings, donated by readers. 2 cellos arrived. He's got maybe 10 or 15 instruments today that have been donated by readers, and I think, you know, there's this goodness in all of us. We want to make a connection. We want to do some good. We want to make the world a little better place, but we don't always know how to do that. And sometimes the problem is so big, we're overwhelmed, and we decide to do nothing at all. And here are people who found a way to make a difference in a man's life. They said sheet music. They said money. They said the missing strings and all of these instruments. And I took them out to Mr. Ayers, who couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe the generosity of people. He had gone so long with people thinking of him as a muttering bum. He couldn't believe that people had any respect for him. And I handed him some of these instruments and then realized, uh-oh, what have I just done? He's going to get beaten to death out here. Where there are a lot of people, you know, with some drug issues who are desperate enough to do anything to get a few bucks, to score a few rocks. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to have to take them. He said, well, what do you mean? I thought you said they were mine. And I said, they are yours, but I'm going to keep them safe for you. And I'm going to call this mental health agency, and maybe we'll keep the instruments over there, and when you want to play them, you can go over there and use them. And he said, well, mental health agency, what would I need that for? There is, with many folks who have a mental illness, a lack of insight into the condition. It's partly a symptom of the condition, and it's partly who in this culture and society would want to admit to having such issues. Or you'll be judged, or you'll be, you know, you can't get a job, you can't do this, you can't do that. So he didn't want to go. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I can't let you out on the street with these things. I took him to Land Community, Mental Health Agency, and he refused to go and play. I checked every day, he didn't go. On about the 7th day, he went. I got a call from them saying, guess who's giving a free concert in the courtyard? And there he was, taking requests. I was so proud of him. I was so pleased. I left with a smile on my face. Next time he gave a concert, he left Lent with the instrument, out on Skid Row. And they called and said, you might want to go and find your friend. He's out there. Violins, cellos, whatever. So I went and I found him and I said, I'm going to spend a night with you on Skid Row and see what you're up against, because I'm worried about you. You need to let me have those instruments. And he says, I can't do that, but you don't have to worry about me. If anybody comes after these instruments, I can assure you, I will fight to the death to defend them. I said, this is precisely my concern. Give me those damn instruments. And I said, look, this is what I'm talking about right here. You've got this basket with 1,000 things on it, and right on top is the cello case, where everybody can see that you're running a cello down the middle of the street here with thousands of people living on the streets. You couldn't conceal it a little bit. He looks at me. He opens the cello case. He pulls out balled up newspapers, balled up rags, looks at me again, then goes down under the basket where you put your beverages at the supermarket, pulls some blankets out, and underneath is the cello. Looked at me and he went, decoy, Mr. Lopez. I'm fine out here, don't worry about me. So that night, before we went to bed, Mr. Ayers crushed cockroaches with his shoes and kicked them into the gutter. He cleared a space for his bedding. He walked to the edge of the curb, recited the Lord's Prayer. He got things together. I looked up into buildings with lights on and I said, Mr. Ayers, let's get you off the streets and into an apartment. He said, no, that'd be really scary. This is my turf. This is where I know who's around me. I don't have to live by anybody's rules. Maybe I can't live by anybody's rules. I was starting to realize this guy plays music in really noisy places, out on the street. Why is that? Maybe it's because he can't hear his mistakes. Maybe it's because his career is still ascending. Maybe it's because he can't return to a small room where every mistake will bounce off a floor wall and he'll go back to the world in which he snapped. And here I was watching him and learning from people like Stella and psychiatrists and others and gaining more insight into this man's psyche, the way his mind worked. And here he is now stepping to that curb again, and in a perfect Shakespearean accent, he recited the Hamlet soliloquy. He came back and I said, where did that come from? John Hay High School, University Circle, Cleveland, Ohio, Mr. Lopez. We had to do a little acting, we had to do a little reading. And I said, and you remember the Hamlet soliloquy verbatim? And he said, well, Shakespeare, Mr. Lopez, aren't you a writer? Excuse me, Mr. Harris. So look at those places though. Don't you want to take this whole act indoors? Put your instruments where they're safe. And he said, no, but look up there, Mr. Lopez. Isn't it wonderful to think that Beethoven and Mozart once worked through the night in rooms like those? They lived and breathed as humans do, and they created something that lasted for centuries. Are you inspired by that, Mr. Lopez? And speechless, for a while, all I could then say was, I'm just inspired by you, Mr. Harris. I've never met anybody like you. We got invited to Disney Hall after that call. Mr. Harris made some friends in the LA Philharmonic. One of them, Peter Snyder, a cellist, agreed to give him lessons in a room, an apartment on Skid Row. We're several months into this thing now, with me frustrated as can be, trying to talk him in. It takes a lot of work. It's called mental health outreach. I didn't know I was doing it at the time. But anybody you see out there in your community maybe has a chance of being reeled in if you've got the permanent supportive housing to put them in, if you've got the mental health outreach workers who can go out and gain their trust gradually over time, meet them where they are. Are you hungry? Here's a sandwich. Are you cold? Here's a jacket. Would you like a shower? Come with me. Would you like a cot tonight? Would you like a bed? Would you like an apartment? Would you like to put your life back together? It works. It works. But this was a tough character, Mr. Harris. Home on the streets. So Mr. Peter Snyder starts giving him lessons in this little apartment. And I got a photo of Nathaniel's mother, Flo, put it on the dresser. And he said, well, I do like it in here a little better than I thought I would, but I can't come in on the streets. So why not, Mr. Harris? He said, because Beethoven would be out there alone. I called Adam Crane, the publicist for the LA Phil. I said, Adam, is it possible to buy a bust of Beethoven? And I hope the answer is yes, because if it's no, I'm going to get a tow truck and move Beethoven from Pershing Square to the Ballington Apartments on Skid Row. And he said, Steve, I will deliver the bust of Beethoven. We put a bust of Beethoven in there next to his mother. One night I couldn't find the name. I called the next morning, Lamp Community, said, you guys have any idea where he is? Yes, he's right here. And I said, well, where did he spend the night? He wasn't in any of his usual places. And Stewart, one of his case managers, said, he spent the night in his room. He moved in. Here we are, 6.5 years later, he's in the same room. I can't tell you that everything is going well. He's not cured. There is no cure. People want to know, is he on his meds? No, he's not. A lot of folks back from that era, for whom the meds were Thorazine or shock therapy, just don't trust that there might be a new generation of antipsychotic meds. I wish that he would give them a try. I wish that he could become more stable. Maybe the meds can do it. I also know that they don't always work all the time for everybody. I know that there are side effects. I sure would love to see him try. But I've learned on this journey that the best way I can serve him is not to be his doctor, not to be his caseworker, but to just be his friend. To just be there for him, regardless of what he needs or when he calls. To stay in touch, to let him know that he can always trust me. And, you know, I start to think about this relationship, and the things that I've learned from it. And you see a guy like Nathaniel out there and you think, well, that poor soul. What a poor suffering soul. When I got to see him, I thought, you know, what's the definition of happiness? What's the definition of success? What's the definition of friendship? This guy's got what we're all after. You walk this earth trying to find your purpose and your passion. Nathaniel Engineers has got this. And whatever was thrown in front of him, he was faithful to his first love. He is still with this thing he's passionate about, this thing that brings him so much joy. He wakes up in the morning and often doesn't know what's real and what's not. The world's always spinning, sometimes out of control. He gets angry, he makes threats. Every day brings new challenges, new difficulties, and he reaches over and grabs an instrument. He reaches over and grabs sheet music, and the world stops spinning out of control. The notes are right where Beethoven left them 250 years ago. He's anchored. He's safe. There's science to it. There's art to it. He's saner than I could ever be. You look at him with his eyes closed, sitting on a milk crate in a tunnel, sawing away at a violin or a cello, and you want to have that joy in your life. You want to have that happiness. And I thought, here I am thinking about getting out of this business because it's in decline. I want to have a passion like that. I want to have something that will be with me forever. And it's Mr. Ayers who taught me that I do have it. My passion is to tell stories. To meet people like him. To be recreated each time I do. Who would have thought that I'd bump into a guy on Skid Row and learn humility from him? Who would have thought that my teacher in high art, I knew nothing about classical music, would be a guy sleeping on the pavement? I am so thankful for the day I met Mr. Harris. It's tough. It's tough. We got something planned and I go to get him and he's not there. We've got somewhere to be and he's angry. We've got, wonderful people who want to drop by to say hello and he's, saying horrible, ugly things. And I've learned that that's not Nathaniel. That's the illness. That he'll come out of it. That beneath that is a man of great generosity. We go to Disney Hall together. At first I was scared to death to go there. I thought, this has got to be difficult for this guy who was on his way. And his professors say he could have landed in one of the great orchestras of the world. So how difficult must that be to go to a place like Disney Hall and see others who made it? But that's never the case. There's not a moment of self-pity with Mr. Harris. He looks down on the stage, he listens to the music, and he celebrates every moment of it. He couldn't be happier. He couldn't be prouder of the musicians who have made it. He couldn't be more grateful that good people have donated instruments, that he can spend hours every day playing music. One day Mr. Ayers was wearing a t-shirt that said on it, Yo-Yo Ma concert date in Disney Hall. I said, what's that? And he said, Yo-Yo Ma's coming to town. Can you get his tickets? And I said, at this point, Mr. Ayers, you know the drill. I call Disney Hall. They meet us out front. They escort us to our seats. We're backstage at intermission talking to your friends in the orchestra. Yes, I think we can get tickets. But why are you so interested in seeing Yo-Yo Ma? You're always talking about the dead guys. And he says, what do you mean? And I said, Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart and all the rest of them. He said, I'm just curious to see what the youngster looks like. What are you talking about? Curious to see what the youngster looks like. He says, it's just been so long. I said, so long since what? So long since I've seen him. And I said, well, where did you see him? Well, we played together, Mr. Lopez. What? Yes, I played with Yo-Yo Ma. We were in the same orchestra at Juilliard. And I said, you played with Yo-Yo Ma and you never told me that? And he said, you never asked, Mr. Journalist. Mr. Journalist. So we go to Disney Hall, and Ben Hong that night, assistant principal cellist in the LA Phil, takes us to our seats. Ben Hong is the guy who's playing the cello in the movie when it sounds like, or looks like I should say, Jamie Foxx is playing. Ben Hong has been a good friend to Nathaniel, and he's the guy who taught Jamie Foxx how to fake it. And it wasn't too hard to do because Jamie Foxx is quite a musician, but the piano is his instrument. And he almost got to where he could actually have played the cello himself, but they used Ben on the soundtrack. So we watched the concert. Mr. Ayers is thrilled to be there with his former classmate. We go backstage afterwards. And we're not sure, but somebody's trying to make the arrangement to have Yo-Yo Ma come in and say hello to the baby. And suddenly he's there in the doorway. He stops. There's silence, and we look at each other. Nobody knows quite what to say or do. I'm a little nervous. Yo-Yo Ma walks in, walks past me, shakes Nathaniel's hand and says, Nathaniel, I've read all about you in these columns. I know how much you love Beethoven. Anybody who loves Beethoven as much as you do is a friend of mine. Shakes his hand, and Nathaniel, very bashful, lets go, takes a step back, looks at me. I look at Yo-Yo Ma. Nobody knows what's here. Yo-Yo Ma then takes over. He moves back in closer, takes a couple steps, grabs Nathaniel, and hugs him. A big bear hug. And he says to him, Nathaniel, you and I are brothers. We're brothers in music. It's good to see you. He then hands Nathaniel his cello and says, I've got to go meet some other people. Why don't you fiddle with this? I'll come back and get it. Yo-Yo Ma leaves the room, and I'm standing there with Mr. Ayers, who looks at me and says, Mr. Lopez? Yes, Mr. Ayers. That was Mr. Yo-Yo Ma. I said, I think I'm aware of that. He said, no, that was Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo Ma. And I said, you know, here are these two guys, they leave the same stage at the same time. They go into completely different ways. Who's the more successful? Who's achieved more? There's an easy answer. Yo-Yo Ma's an international icon. But he's never gotten any joy out of playing anything than Nathaniel does. But he doesn't have to struggle with some of those things that Nathaniel does. And each day, Nathaniel gets to the music, and he's free, and he's home, and he's singing. And I looked at him and I said, you're Nathaniel Anthony Ayers, and you're a friend of mine. The day I met you was a lucky day. I still feel that way. And in my life, I was never the kind of person who got involved. I didn't know that that was a two-way thing. People would come and congratulate me for what I was doing for Mr. Ayers, and I'd have to stop it and say, look at what he's done for me, to teach me all of these things. And most of all, to let me know him well enough to tell his story in a way that would speak to folks in this community, to speak to folks across the country, to speak to folks in South Africa who felt compelled to send me emails. I know through this experience with Nathaniel, for the first time in my life, the meaning of grace. I feel elevated. I feel better. I feel lucky and proud to know him. I hope that one time in your life you get a chance to meet him. I'm sorry I couldn't be today. I want to thank you for coming, and I want to let you know that we've got time for a few questions if you've got them. But first of all, thank you very much for supporting this project. Thank you. Any questions? We'll take a couple. No questions? Everybody's going to the beach? Oh, there's a question?
Mr. Lopez, I wish we could take your help. And I hope next person
I appreciate that. She's wishing me continued good health and hopes the next surgery works out okay. So do I. Let me ask you something. If you went in for one knee replacement, and you had full cardiac arrest, would you go back for the other knee replacement? This is the question I ask myself every day. Let me me ask a question because it often comes up, so I'll ask myself. Often people are thinking, well, okay, that's nice, Mr. Lopez, but I don't have time in my life to get to know somebody, to adopt them virtually, to see them so often, to write a book about it, to have a movie made. But is there some way that I can do something to make a difference? The answer, of course, is yes. And like I was saying, we're all so overwhelmed by the enormity of some of our social and health problems. But yes, there are ways, and I'm surprised as I got to know how Skid Row works, and to learn, you know, that there's something like 50,000, 60,000 people in this greater LA area who are homeless, and a huge percentage of them veterans who came back broken physically, emotionally, mentally, that we just haven't done enough for. What we need to do, if we're not going to personally take on someone's welfare, is to find out what those great institutions are in our communities that do that work. And once you identify them, there are many different ways to support them. You can support them by just showing up occasionally and just being a buddy to somebody. And there are ways that that can happen, maybe through faith communities. You can make links with people in the mental health community. There are cases where that's happened. Maybe if you're able, you can find a program you believe in and write a check now and then. You know, one thing that has gotten some press downtown is this idea of, well, gee, but it's so expensive to help people like this. And what some research has shown is that it might be less expensive to help people than to not help them. And what I'm talking about is, several years ago, there was an effort to identify the 50 sickest people on Skid Row. Now this is an enormous task because there are literally thousands of people, and there are only a tiny fraction of the people on the streets throughout the county. And the idea was, let's take the sickest ones and see what their stories are and what they're costing us. And it took months to identify them, and the ones that they found, many of them had undiagnosed mental illnesses, many of them had severe physical health problems, many of them had addiction issues. And again, we look to write off somebody who has an addiction problem, often when it's associated though with a mental illness, it's the only relief. I mean, if you don't know what's real or what's not, you can't find a doctor, you can't get to a doctor, you can't afford a doctor, but there's a little bit of relief in a bottle or in a pill. I think a lot of us will take that drink or pop that pill, and it becomes more difficult to treat dual diagnosed people if they've got an addiction and a mental illness. But that's what they found out there. They found people, dual diagnosis was very common, and that these people were in and out of jail, in and out of emergency rooms, in and out of courts, in and out of prisons. And you know, the prison might run $40,000 or $50,000 a year, but permanent supportive housing might run $15,000 or $20,000. So it's not just, in some cases, the humane thing to do, it could be the cost-effective thing to do. And the guy who was such a great proponent of that was George Bush's homeless czar, Philip Mangiano, I think is the way you pronounce his name. He came to LA often, and that was the gospel that he preached. You know, not only are we doing the right thing to take care of these people, it'll cost us less. So they took these 50 people and they monitored them. They gave them apartments and all the services that they might need. And they added up what all of that cost versus what it had cost to churn them through the system. And they're finding that there's a bit of a savings in it. And that's a short-term savings. Over the long haul, who knows? Many people that I've known in my 7.5 years with Nathaniel have gone from lying on the street, shrieking, trembling, physical and mental problems, have gone into a permanent supportive housing program, have then gone into independent living, and are now on their own. I can point to a number of people that I've met in the time I've known Nathaniel who have gone full cycle. And the reason they are is because when we provide the right services, it can happen. We know what to do. We just don't always have the political will or the financial commitment to make it happen. And I think the importance of telling stories about people like Nathaniel is that it puts a human face on it and makes it a little harder to dismiss. You know, as a person, he's someone. The first time I was out there on Skid Row and I looked up down the street, I thought everybody out there has got a Nathaniel story. They didn't go to Juilliard, but they've got human stories that we need to know to get past our stereotypes and all the reasons we give ourselves to justice system. Okay, I asked myself that question. I won't do that again.
Are you working on another book?
Am I working on another? First of all, I didn't like my own answer to my own question. Am I working on another book? Here's what I'm thinking of doing. Some of you may know, and if you don't, shame on you. But over the last year, I've been writing a lot about death and dying. Because I love cheery subjects, and I know the readers do too. Actually, it began with my father's declining health, and I discovered, as so many boomers do, who are caring for aging parents, that there are moral, ethical, and legal quandaries, and that, you know, the first time you've got to make a decision about a hip replacement, a feeding tube, you just don't know what to do. I mean, in our case, we had the classic, okay, Dad still wants to drive, but he's a menace and a terror behind the wheel. And Dad, you're going to have to give it up. I've never driven better than I'm driving right now. You want to see lousy drivers? Come on out with me. 90% of the people out there don't have a clue. They don't know how to drive. Okay, Dad, but you're going the wrong way down a one-way street. So, started writing about all of those issues and about things like, you know, when they do polls, the majority of people say they would rather, when the time comes, die at home, but the majority of us die in institutions. And they're finding that if you enter palliative or perhaps in-home hospice care, that patient satisfaction is higher. Sometimes life expectancy is even longer, and it can be cheaper. I don't know why in the middle of all of this finger pointing about Medicare reform in this presidential campaign, no candidate has the courage to talk about how much money can be saved if we get beyond the stigma associated with hospice care and get more people back home where they want to be, where the quality of care might be better, their satisfaction might be greater, and the cost might be lower. It's a direction we've got to move in. And so I've been writing about these things, and then my dad, after many months, died. And I began writing about things like how many people in California who are facing death wish that they had the options available in Oregon, Washington, and Montana. In fact, I'm speaking Monday at Loyola University to the legal director of Compassion and Choices, who is fighting legal cases all over the country to try to establish that if a person who is terminally ill can legally say to a doctor, please remove the ventilator, why is it illegal to say, please, can you give me a prescription that I choose to take myself or not, so that I can end my suffering? Why is the one legal and the other isn't? And she's trying to establish a legal precedent that can maybe someday be applied in California, and if you don't like it, you don't have to take it. And a lot of people who signed up in Oregon and Washington have ended up not taking advantage of this option of self-induced dying, but it's an option that, as I watched my father die, I knew I would like to have. And then there I am, 6 months after my dad dies of congestive heart failure, going into the hospital for a knee replacement, and going home with a pacemaker. And I think, to answer your question, there's got to be a book in this. Would anybody buy this book? And more importantly, if I wrote this book, would I be invited back? Okay, I'll take one more, and then I think I've got to go elevate and ice my leg. We've got a question from a young man here on the fourth row. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. If I wrote for a small publication, how different would the columns have been? Well, I don't know. The LA Times was a great resource once I started on this thing. I mean, I broke some rules on this story, right, about Nathaniel. Even as a columnist, where you have a bit more of a license. to share your viewpoints and to get a little more personally involved. I think it's another thing when you become an advocate for somebody that you're writing about constantly, and I make donations to Lamp Community, and it's like, well, you have a right to question my biases and my loyalties. But, you know, I thought, I've started this, and I've been clear with readers about what I'm doing here, and I think it's important to continue this campaign to try to help educate people. Because once families first get into this, they discover that there's a loved one with an issue, they have no idea often where to go. They don't know what to do, they're terrified, they're frightened, and great organizations like NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, which has been there for me from the beginning and taught me so much, are there. And the LA Times recognized that this was an important story and cause, and that more people might pay attention because we had a compelling narrative, a recurring narrative. We had the story of Nathaniel Anthony Ayers, and people would always ask me, how's he doing? What's the latest? And it might have been easier to do that on a big paper with lots of resources, and the ability to do things like host a forum on mental illness, on, you know, the population on Skid Row and things like that. I wouldn't say that it's impossible though for a small publication to do the same kind of thing, but I will say I got great support from the LA Times on this story, and continue to get great support. And thank you for that question. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to say that this has been a lovely experience. We appreciate your support. And when I say we, I'm talking, of course, not just about myself, but from Cleveland, Ohio. Put your hands together for Nathaniel Anthony Ayers.